Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to speak in favour of the motion. Time is pressing, so I would just like to briefly touch on the scale of the problem facing the UK. And it's fair to say that many families, up to 7.5 million indeed, face a very, very difficult challenge at this present time because of the increase in interest rates and the effect on mortgages. And as we've heard earlier, it's been calculated that that means around £2,400 extra on household budgets every year, and that's £1,000 more than the increase in mortgages in the United States. It affects both buyers and renters due to the effect of landlords putting up rents as well, and yet the government is only proposing a voluntary scheme, which obviously falls well short, and about 1 million families are likely to be missed out by this inadequate measure. And as we heard earlier, the Shadow Chancellor set out a much more effective scheme, which obviously I'll commend to the House. Mr Deputy Speaker, because of the lack of time, I want to move on swiftly, and I'd like to speak about how the government's mortgage bombshell is affecting local residents within Reading and Woodley. This crisis is making what is already a difficult housing situation far, far worse for local people in our part of Berkshire. We've already had very high house prices for some years, and indeed high rents in our area, with a shortage of supply and many other related issues across a range of housing matters. To give colleagues a taste of the situation locally, terraced houses in Reading Town Centre can sell for as much as £300,000. So these are quite expensive properties, and there's a real shortage of property and a large housing waiting list for local authority properties. For a family house, it may be as much as £600,000 or £800,000. So we're talking very large amounts of money already. And as I said, renters face additional problems. We've got an issue with dangerous cladding not being removed in some cases, and also with leaseholders, and indeed other issues with landlords. So there are some serious problems in our area, and that's of course on top of the national problems for families which I mentioned earlier, and colleagues from across the House have mentioned, such as the 20% rate of food inflation and the UK inflation rate being the worst in the G7. Mr Deputy Speaker, I would like to point out, if I may, some of the problems that face individual constituents without giving away too many personal details, but if I could just perhaps give a flavour of the sorts of problems. I do hope that the Chief Secretary will reflect on this. One of my constituents, a gentleman called Peter, who's in a good job. He has a young family, 2 children. His wife and he and the family live in a 3-bedroom house. They are facing an increase of £800 in a month in their mortgage. And they simply don't know how they're going to cope in this situation. In another case, another constituent, Donna, lives in a flat in Reading Town Centre. She faces a £400 a month increase. Again, an absolutely incredible increase in what she has to pay for her own home. And this woman, sadly, is one of many residents locally who've been affected by the cladding scandal, with delays in removing dangerous cladding of various types. So she's already under enormous pressure because of the emotional stresses and strains of having a flat with cladding problems. And in addition to that, she now faces this enormous extra increase. She's a self-employed person with a small business. Imagine how it feels to her. This truly is a dreadful crisis. So I would ask, and I realise that time is very limited, and I hope my colleague can get in shortly, but I would ask the Chief Secretary to report back to the Chancellor quite how dire this situation is, how it's affecting people up and down the country, how my residents in my area are affected, and how other colleagues from across the House are affected. And I would urge him to think about the 5-point plan outlined by the Shadow Chancellor, which has been very well researched and well received across the industry. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. And Alex Cunningham is the